US Army veteran and mental health activist.
A lot of men and women rely on, support groups and different mental health modalities where you physically have to go in and speak with someone. So when these are taken off the table, it's really kind of concerning for me as the United States is still looking at a 20 veteran a day suicide rate.
But it's not just people already in treatment. The World Health Organization is urging everybody to look after their mental health by cutting down on alcohol and smoking and getting some exercise. For those who are in treatment, experts say the key is getting creative.
We are allowing clinicians to connect to their patients via phones, via devices like you and I are using right now, to make sure that we can continue whatever treatment or type of approach that we need to help us. We don't want people to go without during this time because we know it's only going to make it worse if you don't have access to the type of care that can help you with your mental health.
We were supposed to vote.
For now, the world is focusing on how to stop the virus from spreading and keep economies going. Campaigners here in the US, though, are also calling on the Trump administration to boost funding for mental health services to deal with the long-term effects of this pandemic. Giles Gibson, CGTN, Washington.
The United States is announcing sweeping criminal charges against Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The charges include money laundering, drug trafficking, and narco-terrorism. The U.S. is also offering a $15 million bounty on Maduro and other rewards for his associates. Maduro is accused of working with Colombian guerrillas to make Venezuela a transit point to move cocaine shipments into the United States. Maduro responded on Twitter, calling the charges a conspiracy by the United States and Colombia. The border that separates the United States and Mexico has been the source of much tension in the past. People on both sides are now wondering whether COVID-19 will actually make things even worse. CGTN's Alistair Baverstock reports from the Mexican border city of Tijuana.
As COVID-19 wreaks medical, social and economic havoc around the world, there is also potential for political fallout. So far, the US and Mexico have jointly agreed to shut their common border to non-essential travel, but some in Mexico are concerned US President Donald Trump may use the coronavirus crisis as a pretext to further insult and vilify his southern neighbours. Late last year, even before COVID-19 was identified as a threat, Trump argued his border wall was more necessary than ever to prevent what he called a tremendous medical problem from being brought into the US, despite the absence of any evidence that migrants carry increased threats of disease.
As Donald Trump insists on the problems that might come from the South without any proof, simply using the opportunity to demand his border wall. I believe the situation has become favorable for him, because while the U.S. can announce economic stimulus plans with universal subsidies, in Mexico, it's far more difficult given the economic situation we live in.
And it's not just Mexico's relationship with the US that may be shaped by the coronavirus crisis. It's an election year in the US, and on the other side of this border, voters in America will make their choice for president during a campaign dominated by COVID-19 debate.
In San Diego, California, a city that consistently leans Democrat, locals see the potential for COVID-19 turning voting trends around. 60-year-old Michaela Wood did not vote for Trump in 2016, has never voted Republican, but says in crisis, there's a first time for everything.
You know, he's the president of the United States, and, I just can't, I'm not going to say anything bad right now, especially. We have enough issues. But you don't just throw somebody out that's in the middle of a crisis. You can't just say, well, goodbye, we got a new guy coming in and he'll know exactly what to do.
Yet others see the pandemic as damaging to the incumbent as economies around the world crash.
In my view, he's always ran on the economy. Now he says the economy is doing okay, but I'm thinking it's not. So I'm hoping that he can have this under control by the time the elections start, because I don't think he's going to be able to run on the economy.
With the COVID-19 pandemic altering all aspects of life, its political impact may prove to be among its more permanent legacies. Alistair Baverstock, CGTN, at the US-Mexico border.
In South America, the pandemic is hitting Sao Paulo. It's Brazil's hardest hit city, and that has left officials scrambling to try and react. Our correspondent Paulo Cabral reports on work to set up field hospitals to deal with the influx of COVID-19 patients.
Sao Paulo is racing against the clock to get ready for the rise in COVID-19 patients expected in the coming weeks. Most of the country's confirmed cases are here, as well as most of the deaths caused by the virus. So authorities are moving quickly to repurpose major events facilities. This is the Anhembi Convention Center, soon to be a field hospital with 1,800 beds and a staff of 2,100 healthcare professionals. This field hospital is expected to be fully operational by the first week of April. It will be used to treat exclusively COVID-19 patients after referral from other hospitals of São Paulo.
This municipal field hospital will operate as a facility to treat patients that are infected but not in a serious condition that requires intensive care. So it will be key to relieve that pressure from other hospitals.
Another field hospital is also being set up in the Pacaembu Municipal Football Stadium. The mayor of São Paulo says other facilities may still be built, depending on the progression of the pandemic.
We are doing now what is possible for us to do, but we are already looking into other locations to expand these operations if necessary.
With all sports suspended by the pandemic, São Paulo's major football clubs, like Sport Club Corinthians, have stepped forward to volunteer their facilities for use by the city. Corinthians president made his announcement using a cell phone video.
Our stadia, our training center, and our headquarters are all available for São Paulo health authorities to use when necessary. Corinthians is with the people.
No one wants to see these empty beds filled with COVID-19 patients. But judging from the progression of the virus in other parts of the world, officials here are resigned to the likelihood that will happen and want to be ready. Paulo Cabral, CGTN, São Paulo.
Unemployment is reaching record levels in the United States amid the coronavirus pandemic. Restaurant workers are really struggling, but some in the food service business are actually keeping their heads above water. Our correspondent Edis Chianson reports from Los Angeles.
The new reality for millions of people is about limiting all outdoors activities to those essential ones and staying at home. A reality that's forced all companies to make some difficult decisions.
We don't really know how long this quarantine is going to last. We don't know how long people are going to have to be at home. We don't know how long schools are going to be closed. And so it's really challenging for companies to be able to think long term about, building out teams or sustaining teams. And so, for a company that's well funded and that has a reasonable runway, like they may be able to hang on a little bit longer.
That runway wasn't even a few days for some of the small businesses, especially in the service sector.
I was bartending when the order came in from the California governor that restaurants were going to be closed starting Monday. But I went from Sunday having a job, and usually I work Mondays, to Monday that job being completely gone. And the restaurant did attempt to stay open as a takeout only restaurant, but that's a very hard transition for a lot of restaurants to make.
It's mostly the delivery portion of the service industry that has thrived under the current circumstances, but for millions who once relied on the tip economy, there's no easy alternative.
I've worked really hard to get myself a great job in this industry, and if I drove for Postmates or something like that, I would be making a very small fraction of what I could bring in based on my skill set.
Jose Rodriguez works as a chef at Google's headquarters in Mountain View. He believes it was the size and reputation of his company that set his fate apart from his colleagues in the service industry.
Coming from, the restaurant business, where I have a lot of friends, especially in New York, that just got laid off, they don't really they are just having to rely on their savings. I know they're applying for unemployment right now. So yeah, I'm definitely one of the fortunate ones because working for corporate America, right? Google is taking care of us. So we have full benefits, full pay. I'm doing very minimal, administrative work from home.
But for millions of others in the service industry, work from home isn't an option. And with bills piling up, many left without an income are now compelled to think of alternative plans. It is Tian Shan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Displaced families in Syria's Idlib province have endured the horrors of war. Now they face a new threat, the threat from the coronavirus. Here's Arwa Damon.
How do you explain to a population that has lived through bombs and airstrikes, that has been forced to flee multiple times, and seen children die of the cold, that now there is another potential killer, an invisible enemy, and that their best line of defense is self-isolation or social distancing and hand-washing? Fatima doesn't even have running water when she has water at all. The tanker didn't arrive yesterday, so look, this is all we have left. It's nearly empty, she says. Soap is expensive. She washes the kids' hands as much as she can with the little they have. She can't go to the store and stock up. Like all other displaced and living like this, she relies on food distribution. Fear has a different flavor in opposition-held Syria than for most of the rest of the world. We fled from the bombing, from the shelling, everything. And what now? Are we going to be afraid of this? Fatima asks. And that's part of the problem. This is a population that is already resigned to death. But really, what can they do? Even before COVID-19, illnesses and disease ran rampant through the camps and the displaced communities, crammed into any space they can find. There is an effort to try to sanitize some areas, but the resources aren't there. There is one lab here, and the test kits have only just arrived. By Skype, we got in touch with Dr. Mundir Khalil, with the Idlib Health Directorate.
We think that the number of people will die in this area will be more than 100,000 people at least in this area.
He fears a coronavirus tsunami. This, for example, is the Atme camp, a massive, sprawling city in its own right. There is nothing to stop a rampant spread in living conditions like this. The medical infrastructure has been decimated by years of war that saw hospitals and clinics deliberately targeted. First world countries are struggling to handle COVID-19, but what they have is a luxury compared to what is here. There are 600 doctors in Syria's last rebel-held enclave, less than 200 intensive care beds, and around 100 ventilators for a population of more than 4 million.
After Corona, the suffering in this area will continue, and nobody actually do what they have to do to stop this catastrophe.
For 9 years, the international community abandoned Syria to the ravages of war, with hospitals already overcrowded, doctors killed and forced to flee, aid slow to come. What can really protect this population from the ravages of COVID-19?
Spain is extending a nationwide lockdown until Easter to slow the spread of coronavirus. The country now has the second highest number of deaths from COVID-19, more than 4,000. Around 24 at a single nursing home in Madrid alone. Officials have appealed to NATO for help in obtaining medical supplies, including more ventilators. CGTN's Rahul Pathak reports.
Spain's health minister has been speaking to the country's Congress today. Salvador Ida saying that the country was approaching the peak of the curve when it comes to new infections and deaths from the coronavirus. That's despite the latest official figures from the Spanish health ministry that said 655 people have died over the last 24 hours. Still a high figure, but a slowdown on yesterday's number. Remember, Wednesday saw Spain surpass China in terms of total deaths from the virus and is now second only to Italy. Salvador Ida going on to say that we are in a war fighting to produce enough masks, rapid tests and ventilators. Ida really echoing the comments made by Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez a few days ago when he described this country as being on a war footing and also describing this period as the most dramatic in his country's history since the Spanish Civil War some 80 years ago when 500,000 people died. Some bad news from the employment sector as the restrictions implemented by the state of emergency really start to bite when it comes to people's jobs. Around 1.5 million 1,000 people have now been temporarily laid off. One of Spain's biggest employers and biggest department stores, El Corte Inglés, announced that they were having to temporarily lay off nearly 26,000 of its employees, but they went on to add and pledge that those employees would top up the unemployment benefits of all those employees, so they would continue to receive 100% of their salaries during this crisis. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
India has gone through day one of a national lockdown. Many families are out of work and without food, and police are enforcing these strict rules, making sure 1.3 billion people stay home. CGTN's Neha Punya is in New Delhi.
Day one threw up quite a few logistical challenges for both the administration and the people. We saw various grocery stores running out of essential supplies like food and medicines, and the police that have been tasked with enforcing this lockdown, they've been given the powers to detain and arrest people, jail them for anywhere between 6 months to 2 years, have been accused of overzealousness. We saw many instances of police forces standing at borders between two states or two districts and stopping delivery trucks from entering cities and towns. And a lot of people complained about not being able to access basic supplies like vegetables and milk, and now the union government here in Delhi has issued directives to state governments to ensure that deliveries of essential supplies are not impacted. So we are hoping that day two of this lockdown will be much smoother. We're still, of course, seeing heartbreaking visuals from different parts of the country of migrant laborers who've been stranded in cities like Delhi and Mumbai, who are unable to go back home because of the lockdown. There's no air, road and rail travel allowed anymore for the next 3 weeks, and the government says it is looking to see if state governments of the states where these migrant laborers belong to can send chartered flights or trains or buses to take these people back home. We're also expecting some sort of relief from the government for the poor. Millions of people in the country work daily, they're daily wage earners, and they've been struggling to cope as well. And it's expected that this week the Indian government could announce some sort of direct cash transfer scheme where the money could be given to these poor families for sustenance. And we're also given to understand that these families could also be given grains by the central government. All of that, though, yet to be announced.
And that is The World Today. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Mike Walter. China 24 coming your way next. News from China and the latest alerts on COVID. They're on our website, cgtn.com. Coming to you from Washington, D.C., this is China 24, our look at China and its impact around the world.
Unless people die, I suspect we'll be back to needing to beg for ventilators again in another day.
A pioneering edition of the G20 summit this year. Leaders joined by video conference. The focus, the coronavirus pandemic, and how to revive a world economy.
I'm totally thrilled to get back to work. With the income, I can feed the family.
And as factories start cranking again, hope returns. And so do a lot of deadlines.
Last Friday we had tested
live from Washington. This is China 24.
Welcome to our studios here in Washington. I'm Mike Walter. Health authorities are reporting 55 new coronavirus infections in China, but all but one involving people coming into the country from abroad. China responding now with tougher entry policies. CDTN's Wei Yao is in Beijing with the details on all of this.
One thing about testing more people.
Yes, Mike, China will temporarily halt the entry of most foreigners in response to the increase in imported cases. And starting Sunday, the country is sharply reducing international flights, and China's foreign ministry made the announcement. They say the practice is based on the practice adopted by multiple countries. Now, some exceptions will be made, especially for emergencies as well as necessary economic or scientific activities. Diplomats are not affected. And right now there's no end date, but the ministry did call the suspension a temporary measure that will be adjusted as the situation evolves. Mike.
We also know China's president now calling for an all-out global war against the COVID-19 virus. What more can you tell us about that?
Sure, President Xi Jinping issued a call as leaders of the G20 met by video conference. Now, Xi said infectious diseases are the enemy of all and can only be defeated by working together. He called on countries to move swiftly to stem the spread of the virus and proposed that a G20 health ministers meeting be convened as quickly as possible to strengthen cooperations on drugs and vaccines and stop cross-border infections. He also said China has set up an online COVID-19 knowledge center that is open to all countries. Take a listen.
At the most difficult moment in our fight against the outbreak, China received assistance and help from a lot of members of the global community. Such expressions of friendship will always be remembered and cherished by the Chinese people. Major infectious disease is the enemy of all. As we speak, the COVID-19 outbreak is spreading worldwide, posing enormous threat to life and health and bringing formidable challenges to global public health security. Now is a crucial moment, a time for us to rise up to challenge and act with swiftness. I am convinced that through solidarity and mutual assistance we will prevail over this outbreak, and we will all embrace a brighter future for mankind.
Now, President Xi urged a collective tariff reduction within the bloc aimed at boosting confidence and to combat any potential virus-driven global recession. Now, this was the first virtual summit the G20 leaders have ever held and their first gathering since the global pandemic began. And my colleague Wu Guoxiu has more on China's participation at the summit.
President Xi Jinping's remarks to the G20 summit included how to take resolute collective measures against the COVID-19 pandemic and enhance international macroeconomic policy coordination. China's foreign ministry said President Xi's remarks have contributed to a positive and constructive discussion.
The remarks of President Xi resonated strongly with other G20 leaders and has contributed to a very positive and constructive discussion at the meeting, where all the leaders focused on consensus building, on cooperation, on what we can do together on both fronts to contain the spread of the virus and to stabilize our respective economies and the global economy.
The G20 members are injecting over $5 trillion into the global economy to counteract the social, economic, and financial impacts of the pandemic. Wang said China contributed $344 billion. As many are eager to see what China, as the world's second largest economy, can contribute to a stable world economy, Wang says China is making its own efforts.
My question is, in view of the global economic recession, what measures can China take to contribute to a stable world economy?
First and foremost, we try to stabilize the Chinese economy. With the measures we have started to take, with the return of the work of the workers and the resumption of productive activities by the factories across the country, I think the Chinese economy is coming back to life. I think that will act as a boost to the overall global economy. It so happens that some of the other economic centers are being hit by this pandemic. As a major production center of some of the supplies that will be needed, we're trying our best to ramp up production to supply the necessary goods to other countries.
He added that in terms of integrity and stability of global supply chains, countries including China should work together. Wang said the extraordinary measures and strong commitments from the summit will offer much-needed resources and hopefully will boost market confidence for a robust recovery in
I want to turn now to here in Washington.
China's foreign
where
minister
last minute
said China was happy with the outcome of the G20 video summit and that China is looking forward to working with the relevant parties and organizations to translate it all into concrete actions. 吴国秀 CGTN 北京。
China is extending its hand to help other countries fight the pandemic. It has donated $20 million to the World Health Organization, and it sent aid to more than 80 countries and international organizations. China's vice foreign minister says as the first country impacted, China is now sharing all it has learned in fighting this virus.
As of today, China has held about 20 video conferences for experts with over 100 countries. China has sent 7 medical teams to Iran, Iraq, Italy, Serbia, and Cambodia since February 27th. Meanwhile, China has also offered multi-language help on prevention, control, and diagnostic plans
to struggling
with relevant
workers and
countries
companies.
in a timely
And tonight there are
transparent
indications
manner.
that some taxpayers
Senior
may have
officials
to
said
wait as
China
long as
remains
4
committed to helping
months
other
to
nations
see
and stressed
relief
the
checks.
importance of
Nancy
solidarity
Cordes is
and
on Capitol
cooperation.
Hill, and Nancy, you talk about this
Doctors
relief
from around
package.
the
It's
world are
massive.
learning
I
from
mean,
the
roughly half the
experiences of their
entire
Chinese
federal
colleagues using
budget. But what's
platforms
the latest
provided by
on when this
CGTN.
vote is
China's
going to
experts
happen?
are sharing
Nora,
knowledge of how
senators
to
still
combat
tell us they are
COVID-19.
hoping
And
to
joining the
vote
latest round of
tonight,
discussions
trying to sort
were
through
doctors
a
from
last-minute
Canada
flap
and South
over new
Africa.
unemployment
CGTN's
benefits,
Lu
but they
Jiaxin has
know
details.
that the longer...
Hi, good morning. I'm a cardiac surgeon and intensivist here in Winnipeg.
Another online medical consultation where experts and professionals discussed issues ranging from patients' cardiac issues and detailed treatment plans to solutions for critically ill patients.
And also, if the patient have gangrene, I mean the toes or the fingers get black, they are hardly surviving.
In our opinion, the most important thing is take a comprehensive and dynamic process to diagnose your patient rather than rely on a certain type of tests.
Okay, well, thank you. That is a very great answer, and it just triggered my next question. There is a lot of controversy here about the test.
Canadian medical specialist Dr. Perry Gray asked more questions on the treatment for ICU patients. After an hour of consultation, he said he had heard many constructive suggestions and conveyed his blessings to China at the end of the meeting.
I want to thank all of you for taking the time to share your experience with us. We also congratulate you and your country on the amazing job it did to contain the epidemic within your country. And we really hope to learn from you. So thank you very much on behalf of all of us.
Mental health professionals also expect to see an increased demand for their services. We're joined by Michelle Carcel. She's a psychologist, and she's joining us via Skype from La Jolla, California. Let's talk about the psychological impact of all of this. I spoke to a mom today. Her daughter's overseas, fearful she has COVID-19. Even if she wanted to jump on a plane and go see her, she can't because she's in self-isolation. We're hearing these stories of families in New York. They want to be next to their patients that are in ICU. They can't be anywhere near them. Talk to us about the ongoing, lasting impacts of this virus.
Oh, yes, there's so much that we can talk about as far as the emotional
and physiological impacts of this, there's different stages of development of how we have treated this. The first stage, you could see just from previous weeks, has been a lot of anxiety, a lot of survival mechanisms kicking into place to go out and get stuff that we need in order to, stay safe and to be in isolation. And now we're actually seeing a development here where there's a lot more emotion. There's grief that we're seeing, grief and longing for the life and the rituals and the routines that we used to have. And it's a lot harder to stay in isolation than most people, realized. And especially in the story that you were mentioning, these stories now where people are not able to be with their loved ones in critical times. And that is something that we're just not used to. And we're certainly not built for that. So this is definitely something that most of us haven't experienced before and can cause a lot of anxiety and a lot of mixed emotions.
And Michelle, there's so many dimensions to this. I mean, the National Coalition Against Sexual Violence predicting a spike in sexual violence, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, they're seeing an increase in calls. Talk to us about that aspect of this as well.
Yes, this is so unfortunate. When abusers are in the same area and with their victims, we definitely see a spike when it comes to domestic violence. And this is something we must take action on and be very, very serious about. One of the things that happens is when an abuser has a routine or is going out and has a job or what have you, at least the victim has an opportunity to talk to others, talk to their support groups, have their, means to try to get out of the situation. But when they are at home and they're isolated, it is very, very dangerous. And one of the things that I want to express very clearly is that there is help. There are people out there that are readily available to help victims. So please contact your local authorities, reach out to your support groups. You are not alone in this.
Anxiety and depression, those are also parts of any type of isolation. How do you deal with that?
Well, there are many ways to deal with the isolation aspect of this. So one of the things that we try to do, especially from a mental health perspective, is try to change the dynamic of our thinking process. It gets very easy to get locked up in thinking about, anxiety and depression and feeling these different moods. And we need to validate those emotions because they are very real. This is something unprecedented. We haven't seen this in our modern history where a global pandemic has really caused such a change in everybody's life. And there are real things to grieve here as far as loss of jobs or wages or, transitions, children being at home. So it just creates a lot of feelings. So what we want to try to do in these moments is, one, the first thing that you can do is be very mindful of your emotions, acknowledge them. And then the second thing, try to reframe them into ways where we can achieve goals by staying at home and being with our loved ones, whether that's engaging in activities we haven't done before with them or it's been a long time. Things can be as simple as board games or, taking time with the kids. You're still able in some places to go out and walk and participate in things outdoors as long as you're practicing social distancing. So certainly I've seen a lot of wonderful things. I actually had a family get back to me today talking about how they haven't had a chance to go hiking with their children and they were practicing that social distancing and they were able to see beautiful things with their children outdoors. So we are still able to do things and to go ahead and reframe this and an opportunity to do things you haven't been able to do for a while.
And Michelle, we know anybody who goes to see a therapist, one of the things that they get on the receiving end is somebody who listens, that empathy, that connection, that's missing when you're isolated. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so when you're isolated, a big thing that I've been seeing that actually I'm very encouraged about is people who are using technology and they're actually using the internet and platforms where they're able to do face-to-face contact and have happy hours with friends and still engage in a way that's still social. Even dating, we've seen people that are now using technology in a way to date online and participate in things that they haven't done before. It's not the same necessarily as being in person, but you can still use technology to benefit. And if you're able to practice social distancing, that we still can engage, but just make sure that you follow in the COVID guidelines that are mandated.
A different form of courtship, I guess, in a sense. So, Michelle, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
Yes.
Fortunately for people in China, the grueling shelter-in-place situation does not last forever. Restaurants and gyms reopening to the public, but first things first, disinfection. That's ahead.
You've traveled to places where others couldn't be, seen things others couldn't imagine, and heard stories you can't be sure whether to believe. They say that you're privileged, that people look up to you. But only you know how much effort you've made. You're on the ultimate journey to discover a country with 5,000 years of history and nearly 1.5 billion people. Is it a green countryside or a vast sea of neon lights and skyscrapers? Is it a dangerous land choked with smog or the blue sky of a summer's day? What is this China for you? And what is this China for the rest of the world? CGTN. See the difference.
CGTN, covering coronavirus. From Asia, Africa, Europe, and America. The dangers, the uncertainty, a global effort to stop the spread and save lives. For the latest updates on coronavirus, stay with CGTN. See the difference.
We are CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Across China, businesses are gradually coming back on track after battling the virus. CGTN's Sun Tianyuan takes us to one of the worst hit cities in eastern Hubei province.
The standstill over the past 2 months isn't something factory workers in Hubei are accustomed to. What they miss most is the sound of this. Amid the COVID-19 outbreak, Huanggang was one of the worst hit regions in the province. Almost every non-vital industrial production came to a screeching halt. On March 22nd, the city announced that factories can resume operations, a moment that many have been waiting for.
Our work is back to normal. This means the epidemic is fading away, allowing us to return to our normal lives safely and assuredly.
Chenming Group is a paper manufacturer based in Shandong province. Its branch company in Huanggang was supposed to operate 24/7, but then came COVID-19. After 2 months of suspension due to the outbreak, the paper factory is finally back to work, and its capacity is now at 85%, which means it can produce 700 tons of pulp boards for its customers across the country every day. During the shutdown, the company had to purchase products from overseas to meet customers' demand. Despite stagnant growth in the first quarter of the year, the company says it's confident of a turnaround.
After we return to normal production, the factory will operate full steam so as to minimize losses.
Meanwhile, construction projects in the city are also picking up where they left off. Over 400 workers have resumed work on this school building project.
The entire construction site is in full operation mode. We may also need to carry on working at night while ensuring safety in order to meet the September 1st deadline.
A worker says he had been out of work for 2 months, where he remained at home. He finally received a call from his contractor asking him to return to work.
I'm totally thrilled to get back to work. With the income, I can feed the family.
Daily lives are also returning to normal once again in the city of Huanggang. But until the day when citizens can walk the streets without a face mask, the fight against COVID-19 will continue. Sun Tianyuan, CGTN, Huanggang.
The outbreak at its peak brought life to a standstill in many parts of China. The food industry took a big hit since no one went out to eat for nearly 2 months. But with things slowly returning to normal, many restaurants are resuming business. CGTN Xiaoru Shu reports.
Waiting in line and keeping a distance of at least 1 meter, showing the health code, having their temperature checked, and then customers are allowed to enter the restaurant. That's the procedure you can see at every restaurant in Zhengzhou in central China's Henan province, where restaurants have been allowed to go back to work as of March 19th.
It's a piece of good news. Before we reopened, we prepared masks, alcohol-based sanitisers, medical gloves for the staff and customers.
Staying at home for almost 2 months, many people can't wait to dine out. This is a popular hot pot restaurant in Zhengzhou. In less than an hour after it reopened, half of its tables were full, and the staff had to stop letting more people come in.
I feel quite safe to dine out because the restaurants are preparing everything to let us in.
We've deployed 235 people to carry out spot checks on the restaurants. Any restaurant which has a dirty kitchen and provides expired food will be punished.
According to the rules, restaurants should remove half of their tables. Each table can serve only 1 or 2 people. Customers need to wear masks